One of the reasons why I love the phrase random offense, it's something that Andre Iguodala told me
Mm.
in the locker room when I was covering the Golden State Warriors. He said the hardest offense to stop is random offense. It's the hardest one. I think that there's going to be a controlled chaos element here, and that you, the audience, are going to bring the randomness. That's my hope anyway. And speaking of somebody who is brilliant in controlled chaos, Bomani Jones, veteran broadcaster, host of The Right Time, somebody who, I mean, he's just got these bizarre, idiosyncratic talents. A man, by rumor, who has hosted radio programs while doing wordles or cross words or whatever else, Bomani. You know, it's a legend. I don't know. I wasn't there, but I heard people were very impressed. How you doing, man?
I am very good. It was the New York Times crossword puzzle on an iPad. It is a very, very true statement. I would never tell the guy that I was interviewing at the time that that happened, though. He would be really offended. It was actually a fairly inappropriate time for me to be out here doing parlor tricks, but it had to be done.
Oh, it's quite an impressive parlor trick. And, you know, I've played a little bit of a trick on you, I feel like. I feel, you know, I should have been open with you about this. There's this whole topic right now out there about the hunt for the liberal Joe Rogan, the hunt for the Democrats Joe Rogan. There was an article written by Teddy, I think, is it Schleifler? I apologize, Teddy. You know, a lot of people would say that he's one of the best right now at breaking news about mega donors and political infrastructures and shadowy groups. And he had one recently. There's a lot of money flying around behind the scenes because a lot of people in the Democratic establishment feel as though they've been out messaged. They've been elbowed out of the way by Joe Rogan. They've lost a connection point with young men and they're looking for some sort of counter. And when I read the article, I was blown away by the money involved. And Bomani, I'm not saying that's going to be you necessarily, but if you were doing a casting call, you'd have to make that phone call. And so that's a topic that I want to discuss. But I also want to discuss another topic that we might begin with, which is that the New York Times, speaking of Joe Rogan, wrote another article that you were quoted in that Stephen A. Smith is the new Joe Rogan, or at least aspiring to be, if he doesn't aspire to be president instead. So that's a lot. I've been monologuing a while, but I want to talk about this whole idea of Stephen A. Smith as president, an idea that is not being dismissed as crazy, an idea that these mega donors appear to be intrigued by. And you made this point, Bomani, as your jumping off point. What's so interesting is if you were to suggest that Stephen A., instead of being president, should be named coach of the New York Knicks, it would be laughed out of the room. But somehow this is not. Bomani, what do you make of this? You were quoted in this article.
So it is worth noting that when I was called for that article, it was not at all about Joe Rogan. All they talked to me about was the idea of Stephen A. Smith as being president. And then somewhere along the way in this editorial process, and I want to say I talked to the guy like 2 or 3 weeks ago, like it wasn't that recent. But somewhere in the editorial process, it turned into this idea of turning into Joe Rogan. Now, the president part, I mean, look, that dude that's the president in the Ukraine became the president in the Ukraine because he was the president in the Ukraine on TV first, yeah. Right? Like I just want to make it clear we're not the only idiots in the world. And that's not to say that that man, he may have been wildly qualified to be the president. He seems to, at the very least, be doing a good job of looking the part. I have no idea. I'm just saying we're not the only people susceptible to these sorts of things. I was just reading, I forget which book it was by Neil Postman. It was one of these that's more directly related to like the idea of education. And his whole thing, he talks about with the encroachment of television into our lives, that we will reach a point where a prerequisite for running for political office on a political office at a national stage is going to be previous celebrity derived from television. And this seems to be a culmination of that, right? Like that's what Trump had over all the guys that he ran against starting in 2016, was that he was way more famous than the rest of them. The thing that makes Stephen A. Smith attractive, I think, to a lot of these Democratic donors is that he's way more famous than the rest of the people that he is running against, which will have nothing to do with whether or not you can do a good job of being the coach of the Knicks, right? But what these people are looking for is not somebody who could be good at being president, because this is an ironic part of all of this. It's somebody who will be good at winning the presidency. And then you think that you can go from there. And so if all you're looking for is somebody to win, then what you're looking for is somebody that can win a television contest. And so not many people are going to beat Stephen A. at a television contest. I don't think I can beat him at a television contest. And that's how we wind up with this truly nonsensical discussion that even he seems to find to be a bit nonsensical, but he can't walk away from it. Why would you? There's so much that you can gain from entertaining this.
Indeed.
Yeah, Sam, could you play the clip of him on ABC News with Jonathan Karl? It's great. I mean, I think it sounds great.
It's peak Stephen A. Let's see it.
I would hope somebody else would step up that's more qualified than me. But if it has to come down to me, it is something I would consider. Yes, I would. Because I don't mind the thought of tussling with these folks at all, on the left or the right. All of them disgust me, to be quite honest with you.
I love it. It's a different spin on the Donald Trump 2016, what do you have to lose? It's similar to that, but it's different. Instead, it's, I guess it's fallen to me. That's really the approach of it, that we are in such dire straits, ladies and gentlemen. I don't think I'm even qualified for this. I don't even think it should be me, but damn it, I've just got to be the hero because nobody else is going to step up to do it. That seems to be his message. Now, the idea that we're not the only idiots in going for reality stars, TV stars, it might just be that the American people conceive of the job as different, and maybe they're correct. Maybe the job of president is conceivably more of a communications job than whatever we conceived of it as when we were growing up as kids. That's plausible to a certain degree. I think you're a little more bullish on the potential of Stephen A. than I am. I'm still in that place, though, Bomani, where I can't dismiss it as something that could happen. But I feel as though Trump tapped into an issue set in 2016. There was a market inefficiency. And I think that the issue aspect, platform aspect of Trump is a little bit underplayed by people who don't like those issues. But immigration was something that was resonant in the way that he went after it to win those primaries. I don't know if Stephen A. has the issues. Do you think he needs the issues, or do you think that we're post issues right now?
I think that the people who pay the most attention to this stuff, who are by and large the consumers that drive the media cycle, I think that those people probably care about what we would term the issues more than perhaps the median voter does. Like, I think that's a fair hypothesis to throw out there. Right now, though, I do think Stephen A. has an issue that he's thrown out that I think has been very successful, and is the reason why we're here, which is, don't you hate the Democrats? That is the bipartisan issue. Like, the thing that I think Trump tapped in on immigration, and I think it became much clearer in the 24 election truly than it was in the 2016 election, because in the 2016 election, it just felt a little racist to a lot of people. By 24, I think it was truly a bipartisan issue, right? The idea that something has to be done about this. That was something that I think across the board people believed, right? You have the Democratic mayor, now look, Adams is his own piece of work in New York, but this became a very germane issue to him. And if you walk the streets of New York City, you could understand something changed in terms of the population of immigrants and the people who were able to come. And not everybody was okay with it. I'm not talking about whether their feelings are right or wrong. I'm talking about just strictly what the issue happened to be. And so I think one of our mistakes with Trump is that we evaluate him as though he's playing some sort of three-dimensional chess, and I don't think that's necessarily true. Trump got some people behind him who I think figured some things out. Is it possible that Stephen A. Smith get some people behind him that can figure him out? Yes. I think where the difference is between where you and I stand is I do think it's somewhat implausible, the idea that Stephen A. Smith right now could win the presidency, but the idea that it could be a thing, right, that it could truly be compelling, I'm not out on that idea, because if you would have asked me in this time or a month before, April, we'll call it April 2016. April 2016, I went to Paris to interview Ta-Nehisi Coates for the Playboy interview. And he did not even want to entertain any questions about Trump because it was such an implausible idea that he would become the president. And as I'm hearing him, I didn't think that was crazy or escapist for him to do. I was like, hey, man, got to stand on principle. Okay. And then next thing you know, you look up, and this thing ain't no joke no more.
Yeah, no, I can't dismiss it. Yeah, I can't dismiss it. And I also think that Trump winning has opened up a bit of why not me-ism from a lot of different people. A lot of people now.
Or there are no rules. That is
Yeah.
the part that I think it opened up is there are no rules, right? Scandal, there's no such thing anymore as a political scandal, right? We just had something. I mean, I think Gary Hart, I think he's dead, but if he was alive, he had to be up in 2016, like, bruh, what are you talking about?
Infidelity.
Right? Yeah, like this is all it takes. I mean, like for me, that's all it took. And look, he was like handsome and people thought he could actually be the president. Trump people were somewhat terrified of. It didn't work. So like scandal as an idea is gone. A legitimate convicted felon, that one's off the board, right? What is there to tell literally anybody with a platform and a profile in the United States that you can't be the president? Or at least why can't we entertain the idea?
No, I think being entertaining, it might even be a prerequisite going forward. Now, you said, I'm trying to remember what the quote was in the New York Times, something about how it might be a television contest and Stephen A's got more reps than anybody. It might be a podcast contest, though, going forward. I feel like with Stephen A, it might be that the water, what's the metaphor I'm looking for? That the water is spread wide, but it might not be that deep. I don't know if he connects to any particular issue in that kind of strong way. Maybe I'm naive when it comes to the median voter, but I do think the issue set matters. I don't think you get there just on the basis of being entertaining. I see what you're saying, that he found this uniting issue of frustration with the Democrats, but I'm not sure if that's going to get you through a Democratic primary, that people are just frustrated with the party in general. That seems like a median voter, later stage kind of issue.
Well, I think that there's a fair hypothesis to offer that the Democrats are a bit more discerning when it comes to what they expect of their candidates and the likes than the Republicans are. And I think that's kind of hard to dispute. When you kind of look at what the baseline requirements are for somebody to entertain you as a candidate on the Democratic side, I need you to hop over a few more like barriers. You know what I mean? Like, there is no, and this is not someone who is elected, but I think you'll understand what I'm saying here. There really isn't an analog to like Kid Rock hanging around on the Democratic side.
Well,
it just doesn't go that way. Like there are more barriers to entry, I think, for that class of people than there are on the right. The right, I put it like this: the right's a lot less snobby about who they let in if they think the person they let in is going to help them win.
Thank you. Because I heard the pushback in my head. I heard people on the other side blanching at it. And I understood what you were getting at, that there's like a little bit of a more Harvard, a little bit more of that sensibility, because the pushback against what you were saying is that the last guy was senile and, you know, all that. I understood the core of the point that you were making. I want to approach this other thing, though, because this whole idea of the liberal Joe Rogan, the hunt for the liberal Joe Rogan, I'm surprised it's still such a meme. I'm surprised that a guy who's being floated is from our world of sports and sports media and Stephen A. And this is a whole subject. I want to explore that. I think that that's part of what we're seeing right now, is that both sides are trying to learn from each other. And when they lose, they're trying to learn. And there's this lesson that the Democratic side is taking of, we need a that guy. How do we get a that guy? What do you think? What do you think of this whole venture and how it's being prosecuted in a top-down way with these mega donors and everybody else trying to recreate their own version?
Okay, I would like to start by saying what bad lesson learners the Democrats can be, because as I recall in 2016, what they told me was, well, we need to get out here and learn something about these hard scrabble whites. And how did they suggest that we go out there to learn about these hard scrabble whites? They told us to read Hillbilly Elegy. I am convinced that the Democrats created the star of J.D. Vance. I had never heard of this dude till I read that book. And by the way, I read that book and I was floored. And the point that I made was, if a black person wrote that book about black people would burn down his house. We have words for people like that on our side. I don't know what white people call them over there, but I couldn't believe that. But the idea that Democrats read that finger-wagging nonsense that basically blamed all these people for their condition and everything else, and that's what they thought they was going to learn from, right, was to go out here and fuss at these people and tell them that they don't get it right. Like, that's crazy talk. So let's fast forward now to the Rogan thing. Let's talk about a couple of reasons why this is horrible advice. Number one, everybody says they need to find a new Joe Rogan but I ask everyone who says that, what does that mean? Like, nobody stops and takes the step back and asks, A, what does it mean to be whatever you call the liberal Joe Rogan? And B, how did Joe Rogan become the conservative Joe Rogan when Joe Rogan himself is not a particularly ideological creature? Number 3, I think is very important. I think I may have said it was only going to be 2, but I'm going to keep going. Number 3 that I think is very important is how many of those people who are saying we need a new Joe Rogan have actually listened to that podcast even one time? Because I'm not going to lie. I've listened to a little bit of it, but I am not a consumer of that product. Now, to me, how Joe Rogan got here is actually very interesting, very fascinating, and very tied to sports. Number 1, I'm going to ask you this question.
Okay.
Do you know how long Joe Rogan has been doing that podcast?
I think it might have been since before the Obama administration.
09.
Cool. So just right
09.
around that.
He's been doing this podcast for 16 years, okay? Rogan is an early adopter on 2 things. I had a writer on Game Theory, a head writer first season. She made a great point about this because, the comedians, they all know Joe Rogan, right?
Yeah.
She made a very important point, which is Rogan was an early adopter of 2 things that proved to be phenomena: podcasting and UFC. So Rogan has been in this position serving this audience that is exactly the audience that everybody keeps talking about. These disaffected white men. Not that every single fan of UFC is a disaffected white man, but oh, buddy, it's a lot of disaffected white dudes over there, right? Not only does he get in on UFC, but as the UFC thing keeps going, Dana White is basically using UFC as a Trump propaganda arm. Like, it's not subtle, right? It's very transparent, the relationship that White, who stood on stage at the 2016 Republican National Convention, and some of the material, like the actual media stuff that they put together for UFC, those things go hand in hand. So Rogan has a unique position as an onboarder for a lot of things, right? So he gets that audience, I think, not necessarily because of anything he says on his podcast, but primarily because of the exposure that they have to him from his day job. Okay, now you get to that podcast, which has stuff all over the place, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think over the years, you couldn't really give the greatest answer exactly for, like, so what's the MO here of this podcast? So what is the analog to something that doesn't really have a clear formed ideology? I don't know how the left is supposed to do that. And again, it took 16 years to build it up to the place where it's in. Rogan was a Bernie dude at one point, if I am not mistaken, right? The more I talk, I feel like the more you realize why the idea of we're going to find a Joe Rogan doesn't make sense. And the idea that all you have to do is throw some money at it is crazy. The idea that anybody is paying any attention to the actual business of the podcast space and thinks that you can just drop a new podcast off and all of a sudden it's going to go through the roof. No. And the reason is very simple. The infrastructure is in place for an infinite number of podcasts. There remain only 24 hours in a day. Yeah. And so all of us who do podcasts for a living are trying to hold on to the people we have. You think you're just about to show up and then all of a sudden, like, get all these people? This is the sort of thing that when people ask about whether or not the Democratic establishment is out of touch or misunderstands it, it feels to me like in sports where, for example, Victor Wembanyama.
Yeah.
He's 7'5". He's French. He does all these things. He's got a basketball game unlike anything that we have ever seen. For those of you who don't do basketball, he's truly like a 7'5" guard. And in sports, people have a tendency to look at something like that. Patrick Mahomes is another example where you look at Patrick Mahomes and you say to yourself, we got to go find us one of those. Yes, go find this thing there's one of.
Yeah.
Go find this thing that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world, but you are either A, going to find another one, or B, you're going to build one from scratch. I got news for these people. You're not going to build Joe Rogan in 3 years. It takes way more time for you to be able to do that. And so my read on it has been part of why, I guess, if you're going to look for a new Joe Rogan, you have to somewhat acknowledge that what you need to do is offer some views that are not mainstream. Yes. Because I do think they traffic in a lot of that. Now, from what I understand about Rogan's podcast, they also traffic in a lot of dribble, right? Like a lot of whacked out theories that nobody should ever deal with or ever have to tolerate, like come up with. No, there's a lot that's going on there. It's a 3-hour podcast. Like, you know, you got to sift through and find out all it is. But I just feel like when I start walking through what I know that podcast to be and my understanding of it, oh, my fault. I forgot about the other part.
Oh,
no one has shown me any data to indicate that those people vote.
yeah.
I'm just not sold on the idea that people who sit around and listen to Joe Rogan for 3 fucking hours get up and vote. I'm not sure. Maybe they do, but I'd like to see some data. Like people with this idea that at the end, Rogan said he was going to vote for Trump, and now all these guys went and voted for Trump. How do you know that?
No, that might have been cause and effect being switched up or people not understanding. I also think there's an aspect to what you're saying that the people who want this don't actually consume the content, and they're almost looking at the movie at the end of the movie. They notice when Joe Rogan says vote for Trump, they don't understand maybe that he was less of a politically aligned figure for years and years and years and years and years, building up credibility with his audience. And one of the ways you build up credibility or have a currency with the audience is not being controlled. People want authenticity. And so when you open up this conversation of we need someone who has credibility with the audience, a credibility that can be acquired, I think, through seeming not controlled. And that means giving opinions that are off script or maybe unexpected. And then we need to control that guy or girl for our own ends. I don't know how that can conceivably work. It just seems like you're trying to make something that's fundamentally organic in nature happen in this astroturfed way that betrays, yes, as you were talking about, out of touch, it betrays a certain lack of faith or cynical view of people that is too cynical even for me. I can be persuaded that people aren't geniuses or the average person isn't a genius, maybe. I can get that perspective, but I don't think people are like this, where you present something to them that they can smell is false and they're going to want it in their ears on long drives. I just can't see that happening.
Well, you obviously running game on these people, because all you're talking about is we got to find a person to get this across to them, as opposed to what seems to be most necessary is a real assessment about the package that you are offering to people, which is a package that people seem to be rejecting. Right.
Yeah.
Now, this is my read, no matter what side of the aisle you're on. And this, to me, is a thing that Trump tapped into. And I guess it's under the broad heading of populism. But to me, if you do not identify that the core problem for the median American is what corporations have done and continue to do to us, and the fact that what I think is very different about this Democratic Party versus, call it 40 years ago, maybe even 30 years ago, is the relationship that it has with the corporate structure and with that money. Okay. And so if everybody is playing for the same money, it becomes difficult in tangible on the ground ways for people to differentiate between the two parties. Now, are the parties different? Very, right? And I am a black person. So the ways that they are different land much differently over here. They're much more germane here with me, because a lot of it becomes about these social issues that I think are very, very important, and that for white people, it just kind of, hey, it goes either way, right? I see the difference. But if you look at what happened with income inequality and all these other things, I understand the argument that somebody could make, particularly these disaffected whites that people love to talk about. I see why they don't necessarily see what the difference is. The way that this party, to me, needs to establish that it is different is to truly attack the economic situation that is terribly affecting so many people in this country, right? There are so many people who I do think look at as things go and are like, so how am I supposed to get by with this? And if you can't answer that question for them, not I hear you, but let me show you something else, right? That, I think, is the fundamental. It's the Jim Carville, it's the economy stupid idea. But if your party leadership isn't negatively affected by the status quo, then you're not going to encourage somebody who talks about disrupting that status quo. And that is what Trump sold.
Yeah.
We are going to well, hold on. Trump sold two things. We're going to disrupt the status quo, and we go bring back the old status quo when it comes to all this race and woke stuff.
I mean, there is a lot with the Trump branding. I don't want to get too digressive. There was a strange thing with his successful third campaign of marrying the past America to future America and the tech right. It was almost like the past and the future in a coalition against the present is how I conceived of that campaign. And it worked successfully. But I think, you know, I don't know if it's the elephant in the room, but the big driver in all of this is the loss of young men. And maybe, because I said I would get you for 15 minutes or we start talking and it starts going. So you just let me know when you've got to go. I think it's the loss of young men that has the Democratic Party rattled. That's what I see. Because for so long, there was this idea of the youth vote. It wasn't the male vote and the female vote with the youth. It was the youth vote. And when I was young, Obama was this big thing that resonated with young men. Millennials, really, not all of them, obviously, but if we're talking in generalities, he was a big deal to millennials. The Democrats did not have a problem with young men. That was not a thing. And now you're seeing this massive shift, this over 20-point shift in that cohort of people younger than myself. And it's not just disaffected whites, it's across the board. Different demographics of men are not into this party. Do I think that Joe Rogan says jump and all of America's young men ask how high and vote for whoever he tells them to vote for? No, but I think there's something to Trump appearing on all these podcasts that young men like to listen to. And it's just all part of this whole dynamic. So I see what you're saying about how the economics, the anti-corporate, that's something that the Democrats are struggling to channel right now. But it also seems like they might have to moderate on some social issues because there's just something with young men right now that they appear to find unappealing about the Democratic Party and how they're just simply messaging and what they stand for.
Well, I mean, the internet has done a number on these young fellas. The structural shifting of the economy has also done a number. Look, man, not everybody good at school. That was not always a requirement for making a decent living, right? Yeah. If you're not good at school, and look, I'm good at school, right? I didn't have to try that hard. It worked out very well for me. If you're not good at school, man, I don't know what's coming for you, right? But I think that, yes, the messaging and those things you talk about, again, the internet part becomes very important there. And I don't know how you crack that code. I don't know how you get beyond...
I'm saying more like, I'll give you an example. When I was watching some of Kamala's events, there were the future is female or trust women was this banner. And I like women. I'm not against trusting a woman, but there is something to that message where you could argue that that's not explicitly saying don't trust men, but it did seem like the party became pitched to one side.
Okay, so you raise an interesting question there. And this is something that I think about and look at for a bunch of stuff, which is, I think about this in the terms of race generally, but I think gender is also another part of it, right? So when I did my show for HBO, the first episode, we did a thing about why is it that black people hate Duke basketball? And it ultimately landed on the idea that those white dudes were beating the hell out of the teams that we loved, right? Like, I really looked at it in Duke basketball. Every team that we ever loved, they beat them all on national television in front of the whole world, right? It was a pretty funny thing, I think. We put together a whole museum with jokes. Jalen Rose even showed up, you know? We did all this stuff. And a group of people that I had worked with that I thought of the world of, mostly middle-aged to older white dudes, did not realize it was a piece of comedy. And the point that they made was that, well, most white people, they can't find the joke when you mention race. Like, it all shuts down. There is, I think, an indisputable level of sensitivity that the groups that are in the positions of privilege have when you start doing something that deviates from the world that they know and understand, right? There is an argument that is an obligation for the party on the left to fight against that. However, if fighting against that creates a problem for the ultimate goal of winning the election, what exactly are you supposed to do? Now, in theory, a two-party electoral system is supposed to moderate everything and bring everything to the center to make it go. What is kind of frustrating about being on the left is that it never feels like the right has to moderate anymore. It feels like they have a gain, and Trump being an example of it, of going even farther and farther to the right. And so there is an understandable impulse from people who run a campaign like Kamala Harris's, for example, to say, no, we're going to push back, and we need to get them to understand that it's okay to vote for a woman. But is it possible for you to do it with the messaging they're doing? Probably not. Well, how do you make it possible? I don't have the answer for that. Obama kind of avoided race unless it was absolutely impossible, right? He did the Philadelphia speech, and that didn't even work. They weren't even happy with that one, right? And they was like, oh, okay, cool. Well, we just gonna have to leave this alone. If you read Game Change, for example, it talks a lot about Obama being in there like, guys, I'm black. We don't have to hide from it. And the white guys are like, trust us. We know white people better than you do. That's basically what they were saying. Maybe that's a part of it that comes into it for the Democrats. That's the thing the Carville talks about, is we have lost these guys. What the Democrats are trying to figure out is how you can approach those people without compromising what you consider are your fundamental principles. My argument is the way that you did reach those people in the past was through economics. I just don't know that you're going to convince me that there's another way to do it. If we're talking about the idea if you find a new Joe Rogan, what is the overlap of the Democratic Party and Joe Rogan? Said it earlier. It's Bernie Sanders. Like, it's a fair question to ask. And so to me, I think all of those things get fixed if those young men, yeah, the internet has got them. They've got, there are a lot of views socially that I think that run counter to what the Democrats talk about. I do think a lot of them bristle at the idea of, trust women and stuff like that. I also think a lot of them young boys going to see their parents, their grandparents with serious problems with healthcare and unable to get it, dying horrible deaths, right? I'd like to think that those things are going to land. Not that I want that to happen, obviously, but that those things would land with them more than what Joe Rogan is talking about on a podcast. Well, how are you going to be the alternative to what the status quo is when that stuff happens? That, to me, remains what you need to do instead of trying to find these quick fixes. But they don't want to do that, right? They're more about mischief than anything approaching a revolution.